I am Zuri, 34 years old, and my soon-to-be ex-husband sat across from me in a downtown Atlanta courtroom wearing a smug grin and a custom-tailored suit paid for by my corporate account. "You will never touch my money again," Marcus sneered, sliding a heavily weighted divorce settlement across the polished mahogany table. In the gallery directly behind him, his 26-year-old mistress Chloe leaned over to my sister-in-law and whispered loudly enough for me to hear that I did not deserve a single dime. I simply adjusted my designer blazer, kept my posture perfectly straight, and handed a sealed manila envelope to my attorney. The lawyer passed it up to Judge Davis. The judge broke the seal, pulled out the document, and began to read. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the first page, and suddenly let out a booming laugh that echoed off the high courtroom walls. He looked down at Marcus with a mixture of amusement and pure pity. "Oh, this is good," the judge said quietly. I watched as the arrogant smiles on Marcus and Chloe melted away their faces, draining of color until they were pale with absolute fear. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch the people who betrayed you dig their own graves. The air conditioning in the courtroom hummed a low, steady rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. For months, I had been the silent, dutiful wife, enduring public humiliation and private betrayal while meticulously weaving a net that Marcus was currently wrapping around his own neck. Marcus sat at the plaintiff table, exuding the false confidence of a man who believed he had outsmarted a woman who literally made her living outsmarting people for the elite of Atlanta. He was 36 years old, a real estate developer whose entire brand of black excellence had been carefully manufactured by my crisis management public relations firm. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms, looking at me as if I were a piece of garbage he had finally managed to scrape off his expensive shoes. The settlement document he had just pushed across the table offered me nothing. No alimony, no claim to his businesses, no share of the properties we had supposedly built together. He truly believed he had locked away all his assets in a fortress I could never breach. Behind him in the gallery sat Chloe, her youth and ambition weaponized into a sharp, mocking smile. She wore a bright red dress completely inappropriate for a courtroom, but perfectly suited for a woman who wanted to make sure everyone knew she had won. Beside her sat Jasmine, Marcus's 35-year-old sister, nodding in agreement with every disrespectful whisper Chloe uttered. Jasmine had never liked me. She thought I was too independent, too focused on my career, and not submissive enough to cater to her brother's fragile ego. Seeing them sit together, a united front of betrayal and internalized misogyny, would have broken me a year ago. But today, I felt absolutely nothing but cold, calculated anticipation. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer and maintained a neutral expression. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply waited for the judge to finish reading the single piece of paper that was about to obliterate Marcus's entire existence. Judge Davis took his time, his eyes darting back and forth across the page before he let out that echoing laugh. It was a laugh of genuine disbelief, the kind of reaction a seasoned legal professional only gives when they witness a level of hubris so monumental it defies logic. When he said those words, "Oh, this is good," the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus dropped his arms, his posture stiffening. Chloe stopped whispering to Jasmine. The silence in the courtroom became suffocating. They were waiting for the axe to fall, waiting to understand how a single letter could turn their guaranteed victory into a moment of sheer terror. But to understand exactly how Marcus had willingly handed me the sword for his own execution, we have to rewind the clock to 8 months earlier, to the exact moment the illusion of my perfect marriage shattered. It was a lavish Saturday evening in the heart of Atlanta. The grand ballroom of a luxury hotel was packed with the city's most influential politicians, business owners, and socialites. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables draped in black silk. The occasion was the annual Black Excellence in Real Estate Gala, and Marcus was the man of the hour. I stood near the back of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching my husband stand at the podium under a spotlight. He looked handsome, powerful, and completely self-made. Nobody in that room knew that just 6 months prior his firm had been on the verge of a catastrophic bankruptcy due to a zoning scandal. Nobody knew because my PR firm had worked 8-hour days and sleepless nights pulling favors, spinning narratives, and burying negative press to save his reputation. I had single-handedly kept his empire afloat and orchestrated his nomination for this very award. Marcus gripped the glass trophy, flashing his signature charismatic smile at the audience. "I want to thank God, my investors, and the incredible team that holds my vision together," he said into the microphone. His voice resonated with practiced sincerity. "But most of all, I want to dedicate this award to my brilliant project manager, Chloe. Her tireless dedication, her late nights at the office, and her unwavering belief in my potential are the reasons I am standing on this stage tonight. Thank you, Chloe, for being my rock." The audience applauded politely. I stood frozen. Not a single mention of my name. Not a word about his wife, his partner, the woman who had literally scrubbed his public record clean. I watched as Chloe, sitting at the prime table right in front of the stage, stood up and blew him a kiss. The disrespect was so blatant, so publicly humiliating, that I felt a physical pain in my chest. But I'm not a woman who makes a scene. I'm a crisis manager. When a crisis hits you, gather data. I set my glass down on a passing waiter's tray and pulled out my phone. A nagging suspicion that had been eating at me for weeks suddenly demanded attention. I opened my banking app and navigated to my firm's corporate American Express account, a card Marcus had access to for joint business expenses. I scrolled through the recent transactions, my eyes scanning the lines of data, until they locked onto a charge that made my blood run cold. $40,000 at an exclusive luxury jeweler in Buckhead, processed just 2 days ago. My mind raced. Marcus had not given me any jewelry. I zoomed in on a photo a colleague had just posted on social media from the front table. I looked closely at Chloe's neck. Resting against her collarbone was a stunning, intricate diamond tennis necklace, a custom piece that matched the exact aesthetic of that specific jeweler. The math was simple, brutal, and undeniable. My husband was not just sleeping with his 26-year-old assistant. He was financing his infidelity using my corporate funds, essentially making me pay for the very jewelry his mistress was flaunting in my face. I did not scream. I did not throw a drink. I walked quietly out of the ballroom, took the elevator down to the VIP parking deck, and waited by Marcus's luxury sedan. 20 minutes later, he came strolling through the concrete garage, his award tucked under one arm, whistling a cheerful tune. When he saw me leaning against the driver's side door, he paused, a brief flash of annoyance crossing his features before he plastered on his charming smile. "There is my beautiful wife," he said, walking toward me. "Why did you leave the ballroom? We have a private after-party to attend." I did not move. I just looked at his necktie, making sure my voice was completely devoid of emotion. $40,000, Marcus, I said softly. At a luxury jeweler on my corporate card. A card meant for vendor payments and media buys, not for wrapping diamonds around the neck of your project manager. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. The charming smile vanished, replaced immediately by defensive aggression. He stepped into my personal space using his height to intimidate me, a tactic he frequently deployed when cornered. "Are you seriously doing this right now, Zuri?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the empty parking garage. "I just won the biggest award of my career, and you are down here acting like a jealous, insecure wife. I bought that necklace as a bonus for Chloe because she actually supports me. She works hard for my company. It is a business expense to maintain our corporate image. You are a PR executive. You should understand how optics work." I stared at him, amazed at the sheer audacity of his gaslighting. "You charged $40,000 of my money to buy your mistress jewelry, and you are trying to write it off as a business expense?" I asked, keeping my tone deadly calm. Marcus scoffed, shaking his head in mock disappointment. You are always about the money, Zuri, always calculating. This is exactly why I could not thank you on stage. You do not understand high-level business, and you certainly do not understand how to support a black man building an empire. You are too busy trying to emasculate me. If you were half the woman Chloe is, maybe I would not have to find comfort outside my own home. He was trying to break me, trying to make me feel inadequate so I would back down and accept his behavior. What he did not realize was that I had already pressed record on my phone in my pocket before he even walked up. Every word of his narcissistic, financially abusive confession was being safely stored in the cloud. I simply nodded, stepped away from the car, and said, I understand perfectly, Marcus. Enjoy your after party. I turned and walked to my own car, leaving him standing there confused by my lack of tears. I was not going to cry over a man who was already a liability. I was going to ruin him. The next morning, the assault on my sanity continued, this time from his family. I was in my home office in our Buckhead mansion, reviewing the audio file from the night before, when the heavy oak doors swung open without a knock. In walked Jasmine Marcus's sister, accompanied by her white husband, Connor. Connor was a wealth manager, a 38-year-old man who oozed pretense and privilege. He had always treated me with a condescending brand of arrogance, viewing my PR agency as a frivolous side hustle compared to his supposedly brilliant financial maneuvers. Connor leaned against my doorframe, swirling a cup of coffee he had just made in my kitchen. Well, if it isn't Atlanta's favorite cleanup crew. Connor mocked, a smirk playing on his lips. Marcus told us you threw quite the little tantrum in the parking garage last night. You really need to calm down, Zuri. Cleaning up other people's trash in the media does not make you a business mogul. You need to step aside and let Marcus handle the real money. I kept my eyes on my laptop screen, refusing to give him the satisfaction of eye contact. Connor, I said evenly, unless you are here to offer me a retainer for crisis management, I suggest you leave my office. Jasmine marched up to my desk, slamming her designer handbag down on my paperwork. Do not speak to my husband that way, she snapped. Connor is right. You are out of line, Zuri. Marcus is building a legacy, a real estate empire for our family. And what are you doing? You are obsessing over a necklace because you are bitter. Jasmine leaned over my desk, her eyes filled with a cruel, vindictive light. She knew exactly where my deepest vulnerabilities lay, and she aimed straight for them. Let us be honest here, Zuri. You have spent the last 5 years married to my brother, and you have given him nothing. No children, no heir to his throne. You prioritized your little PR firm over giving Marcus a son. A man needs comfort. He needs a legacy. If you cannot provide that because your womb is as cold as your personality, then he naturally has to find comfort elsewhere. You should be thanking Chloe for keeping him happy while you sit in here typing on a computer. The viciousness of her attack on my fertility was a low blow even for Jasmine. For years we had struggled to conceive, and Marcus had always blamed my stressful career, completely ignoring the fact that his own lifestyle was highly detrimental. Connor let out a short, nasty laugh from the doorway. She is right, Val. Just play your part. Let Marcus build his empire without your nagging. It is the least you can do. They stood there waiting for me to break. They wanted me to scream, to throw things, to prove that I was the unstable, hysterical woman they needed me to be to justify Marcus's infidelity. I looked at Jasmine's triumphant face and Connor's smug grin. My mind processed the variables. Connor was greedy. Jasmine was deeply insecure. Marcus was reckless. They were the perfect combination of arrogant and stupid. I said absolutely nothing in my defense. I did not justify my career, nor did I defend my worth as a woman. I simply closed my laptop with a soft click, stood up, and silently began packing my files into my briefcase. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction, offering them the illusion of my defeat. I let them think their cruel words had broken my spirit. Jasmine scoffed, grabbing her purse. That is what I thought. Come on, Connor, let us leave her to her spreadsheets. They walked out, their laughter echoing down the hallway. I stood in the quiet of my office, perfectly composed. I did not just survive their attack, I used it. In that moment of silence, I realized that Marcus alone was not enough. The entire family needed to be dismantled, and Connor, with his arrogant superiority and his desperate need to be part of Marcus's real estate deals, had just volunteered himself as the perfect collateral damage for the trap I was about to set. The game had officially begun. Sunday morning in Atlanta carried a specific kind of weight, especially within the hallowed halls of Greater Fellowship Sanctuary. This was not just a church. It was the social epicenter of the city's affluent black elite. Politicians, business moguls, and high society matriarchs filled the velvet-lined pews every week to see and be seen. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing when he chose this battlefield. He was attempting to weaponize our faith community against me to strip away my social standing before I could even formulate a defense. I arrived 15 minutes after the service began wearing a tailored emerald green dress that commanded attention without screaming for it. My heels clicked softly against the polished marble foyer as the ushers opened the heavy double doors to the main sanctuary. The choir was just finishing their opening hymn, their voices soaring to the vaulted ceilings. I walked down the center aisle, my head held high, looking for my usual seat. That was when I saw them. Sitting dead center in the very front row, a place of honor, usually reserved for major donors and community leaders, was Marcus. And sitting right beside him, her hand resting brazenly on his thigh, was Chloe. She wore a tight, pale yellow dress that belonged at a nightclub, not a Sunday morning service. The sheer audacity of bringing his mistress to our church to sit in the seat that belonged to me was a calculated declaration of war. He was sending a message to the entire congregation. I was being replaced and he was daring anyone to object. I did not falter. I did not turn around. I simply shifted my trajectory and took a seat 3 rows behind them, perfectly positioned so Marcus could feel my presence burning into the back of his neck. The congregation had certainly noticed. I could feel the sudden shift in the air, the collective intake of breath, the subtle turning of heads. The whispers started almost immediately, traveling down the pews like a slow-burning fuse. Pastor Thomas took the pulpit. He was a charismatic man known for his booming voice and perfectly tailored suits, and he was also one of Marcus's closest friends. They played golf every Tuesday. Marcus had clearly gotten to him first, twisting the narrative to paint himself as the long-suffering husband. Pastor Thomas adjusted his microphone, his eyes scanning the congregation before locking directly onto my section of the room. Today, the pastor began, his voice echoing through the massive speakers. We need to have a difficult conversation about the sanctity of the home. We live in a modern world where ambition is praised, but we must ask ourselves at what cost. I see too many households crumbling because the foundational pillars are being abandoned. I see wives who are so consumed with climbing the corporate ladder, so obsessed with worldly ambition and public relations that they leave their husbands starving for comfort and peace in their own homes. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the older members of the congregation. The targeted rhetoric was not subtle. It was a direct, surgical strike aimed right at my reputation. Marcus turned his head slightly, peering over his shoulder to look at me. A triumphant, mocking grin spread across his face. He actually believed he had won. He believed that by turning the church against me, he had socially exiled me from the elite community that fed my public relations firm. He thought I would bow my head in shame and run out the back doors. I sat perfectly still, my expression serene. I listened to Pastor Thomas spend the next 30 minutes detailing how a man driven to find comfort outside the home is often just a man crying out for a wife who refuses to fulfill her divine duties. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting delivered from a sacred pulpit. Chloe leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder, playing the role of the devoted, supportive woman, while half the church cast judgmental side eyes in my direction. When the sermon concluded, it was time for the offering. The ushers began passing the velvet plates down the aisles. This was the moment Marcus expected me to break. He expected me to hide. Instead, I stood up. I did not wait for the plate to reach my row. I walked gracefully out of my pew, my emerald dress catching the light, and made my way straight to the front of the sanctuary. The entire church watched in stunned silence as I approached the altar. Pastor Thomas looked down at me, a flicker of guilt flashing across his eyes. I reached into my designer bag, pulled out my checkbook, and uncapped my pen. I took my time writing out a check for exactly $1,000. I blew on the ink to dry it, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the golden offering plate at the foot of the pulpit. I looked up right into the pastor's eyes and gave him the sweetest, most forgiving smile I could muster. "Thank you for the inspiring word, Pastor," I said, my voice carrying just enough to reach Marcus in the front row. "Keep building the community." I turned around and walked back down the center aisle. I did not look at Marcus. I did not look at Chloe. I walked out the heavy sanctuary doors with the grace of a queen, leaving a room full of peasants. I could hear the congregation erupt into furious, hushed whispers the moment the doors swung shut behind me. I had not given them a victim. I had given them a woman entirely unbothered by their judgment. The moment I reached the quiet safety of my luxury SUV in the parking lot, the smile vanished from my face. The performance was over. It was time to go to work. I started the engine, connected my phone to the Bluetooth system, and called my private wealth attorney, David. He picked up on the second ring. "David, we are moving to phase 2, I said, pulling out of the church parking lot. "Marcus is trying to socially isolate me, which means the financial isolation is coming next. I need you to set up a labyrinth of shell companies immediately. I want a parent corporation registered in Delaware under a blind trust. Name it Z Corp. I will be the sole beneficial owner, but my name cannot appear on any public registry." "Consider it done, Zuri," David replied, the sound of keyboard clicking echoing through the speakers. "What is the strategy?" "Marcus is going to try to hide his real estate assets to protect them from the divorce," I explained, merging onto the highway. "He is arrogant enough to think he can outsmart me, but he is lazy with his paperwork. I want you to create a subsidiary LLC under Z Corp. Make it look like a standard aggressive real estate holding company. Use dummy directors for the initial filing people Marcus does not know. Make the corporate structure so convoluted that a basic background check will just show a wall of corporate jargon. I need this entity ready to receive assets by the end of the week." "And what are we naming this subsidiary trap?" David asked. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind locking onto the perfect bait. Marcus has an ego the size of Texas. He loves words that sound dominant. Name it Apex Holdings. Once it is fully incorporated under Z Corp, I will make sure the paperwork accidentally falls right into his lap. He will think he found the perfect, untouchable vault to hide his money. He will not realize the vault belongs to me. The trap was set, but for the snare to snap shut, Marcus had to walk into it willingly. He had to believe he was the apex predator, the mastermind who was ruthlessly stripping me of my hard-earned lifestyle. I spent the next 2 weeks running my public relations firm with absolute precision during the day, while quietly monitoring Marcus's chaotic financial moves at night. Just as I predicted, the pressure of his impending multi-million-dollar real estate developments was making him sloppy. He wanted a clean break, and he wanted it fast, before any of his new investors could catch wind of a messy divorce. The climax of his arrogance arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my glass desk in my corner office reviewing a press release for a client when the doors burst open. Marcus marched in, exuding a toxic mix of aggression and triumph. He did not bother knocking. He walked straight up to my desk and threw a thick stack of legal documents right onto my keyboard. Chloe strutted in right behind him, carrying a designer handbag that I knew had been purchased with my corporate funds. She stood by the door, crossing her arms, looking around my office as if she were already measuring it for new curtains. "What is this, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. "That is your reality check, Zuri," he said, leaning heavily over my desk, invading my space. "It is a post-nuptial asset separation agreement. My lawyers drew it up this morning. You are going to sign it right now, and you are going to waive every single right you have to my upcoming commercial real estate developments." I looked down at the documents. The bold print at the top spelled out a complete surrender of my marital rights to his business ventures. He was trying to cut me out of the very empire I had helped him build. "You cannot be serious," I said, allowing a tremor to enter my voice. "We built your brand together. You cannot just erase me from the profits." "Watch me," he sneered, tapping his finger hard against the paper. You think you are so smart, Zuri. You think because you run a little PR firm, you control everything. Well, the real money is moving. I am transferring all my capital, every single property deed, and every ounce of my liquid wealth into a new, untouchable LLC. It is a blind corporate structure. You will never be able to pierce the corporate veil. It is called Apex Holdings, and it is going to make me tens of millions. You are getting nothing but this office and your little cleanup crew business. He had taken the bait. My attorney had flawlessly executed the placement of the Apex Holdings corporate shell, making it look like a prime, anonymous financial fortress. Marcus had hijacked the LLC, transferring his entire net worth into an entity he thought he controlled. He had no idea he had just walked into a vault where I held the only key. But Marcus needed to see me break. He needed to believe he had defeated the mighty Zuri. It was time to give him the performance of a lifetime. I let my breathing hitch. I forced my eyes to widen in manufactured panic. I looked at the documents, then up at Marcus, allowing my lower lip to tremble. Marcus, please, I begged, my voice cracking perfectly. Please do not do this. I gave you 5 years of my life. I sacrificed my own peace to manage your crises. You cannot just leave me with nothing. How am I supposed to maintain my lifestyle? How am I supposed to explain this to the firm? I raised my hands, letting them shake visibly. I let a single perfect tear spill over my eyelashes and roll down my cheek. I pulled my shoulders inward, making myself look small, desperate, and completely shattered. Marcus, please do not take everything. Just give me a percentage. Just something so I do not have to start over from scratch. Marcus laughed. It was a cold, heartless sound that echoed off the glass walls of my office. He reveled in my fake misery. He looked at me as if he were a king gazing down at a peasant begging for scraps. You should have thought about that before you decided to be a cold, unsupportive wife, he mocked. You thought you were the boss. Now you are just a woman begging for a handout. Sign the paper, Zuri, or I will drag this out in court until your PR firm is bankrupt from legal fees. Chloe laughed from the doorway, the sound grating and sharp. Just sign the paper, Grandma, she taunted, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Marcus is playing in the big leagues now. You are holding him back. Time to accept that you lost and move out of the way. I looked at Chloe, letting my face crumble into absolute despair. I picked up the heavy silver pen from my desk. My hand shook violently as I lowered the pen to the signature line. I let out a jagged, theatrical sob, pressing the pen to the paper. I signed my name on the final page of the asset separation agreement, waiving my rights to his personal accounts, entirely unaware to him that his personal accounts no longer existed because they were now fully absorbed into Apex Holdings. I pushed the signed documents across the desk. I buried my face in my hands, sobbing loudly, putting on an Oscar-worthy display of a woman who had just lost her entire world. Marcus snatched the documents off the desk, a massive, victorious grin spreading across his face. He rolled up the paperwork and tapped it against his palm. Good girl, he said dismissively. My lawyers will file this immediately. Enjoy your little office, Zuri. Do not call me again. He turned around, draped his arm around Chloe's waist, and kissed her cheek. Let us go celebrate, baby, he said loudly. I am officially a free man. They strutted out of my office, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind them, sealing my supposed defeat. I sat perfectly still, my face buried in my hands, waiting until the sound of their footsteps completely faded down the hallway. I waited until I heard the distinct chime of the elevator doors closing. The moment the silence settled over my office, the performance ended. I lowered my hands. My tears stopped instantly. My breathing leveled out into a calm, steady rhythm. I reached over to the tissue box on my desk, pulled out a single square, and carefully dabbed the fake moisture from my cheeks, ensuring my makeup remained flawless. I sat up straight, rolling my shoulders back, the illusion of the broken, begging wife vanishing into thin air. I picked up my desk phone and dialed my private wealth attorney. David answered immediately. David, I said, my voice completely devoid of the panic from 2 minutes ago. I spoke with the icy precision of a woman who had just secured absolute victory. Marcus just walked out of my office. He signed everything over. He officially transferred every dime of his net worth, every property deed, and all of his liquid capital directly into Apex Holdings. I heard David chuckle on the other end of the line. So he actually did it. He really transferred his entire empire into a subsidiary entirely owned by your holding company. I looked down at the silver pen I had used to sign the worthless post-nuptial agreement. I smiled a genuine, dangerous smile. Yes, David. The mouse took the cheese. Lock down the corporate veil. Do not let him realize he is putting his money into my bank account until I am ready to pull the trigger. We are moving to the next phase. Let us see how much more debt his idiot brother-in-law wants to throw into my new vault. Connor had always harbored a ravenous, unchecked greed. He married Jasmine not just for her, but for proximity to Marcus in the lucrative Atlanta real estate circles. However, Connor possessed the kind of arrogant mediocrity that made him desperate to prove he was the true financial genius of the family. The moment he caught wind of Apex Holdings through Jasmine, his ambition overrode any remaining shred of his so-called financial prudence. He saw Apex as the ultimate vehicle to elevate his own status. Marcus had bragged about a prime commercial plot in downtown Atlanta, boasting that it would yield a 30% return within the first fiscal year. Connor wanted in, and he was willing to bet his entire life on it. He aggressively approached Marcus, practically demanding a piece of the action. Marcus, blinded by his own newly minted untethered ego, agreed to let Connor buy into the partnership. But Connor did not have the liquid capital for a buy-in of that magnitude. He went to his banking connections, leveraging every single asset he owned. He put up his house, his investment portfolios, and his retirement accounts, personally guaranteeing a staggering $5 million commercial loan. He was entirely convinced that tying his financial fate to Marcus was a foolproof strategy. 2 days after the loan was approved, Connor could not resist the urge to gloat. He walked into my public relations firm unannounced, bypassing my receptionist with his usual obnoxious entitlement. He pushed open my office doors wearing a custom-tailored suit that he clearly thought projected power. He sat down in one of my guest chairs without being invited, crossing his legs and giving me a look of pure, unadulterated condescension. He wanted to make sure I knew exactly how excluded I was from the family fortune. Val, he started using that diminutive nickname I absolutely loathed. I just thought you should hear it from me before the ink dries. Marcus and I are officially partners in Apex Holdings. We just secured a massive plot of commercial land right in the heart of downtown. We are going to develop a multi-use high-rise that will generate tens of millions. It is going to be the crown jewel of Atlanta real estate. He paused, leaning forward to deliver his intended fatal blow. The best part is the legal structuring. Marcus made sure that your little post-nuptial signature keeps you entirely locked out. You will not see a single penny of those profits. You get to stay here managing press releases while we build an empire. I hope you are comfortable being left behind. I sat back in my chair, folding my hands neatly on my desk. I did not glare at him. I did not show an ounce of the fury he so desperately wanted to provoke. Instead, I offered him a warm, polite smile. That sounds incredibly ambitious, Connor, I said, keeping my voice perfectly even. A prime downtown development requires a lot of vision. I sincerely congratulate you and Marcus on your new partnership. I am sure this investment will bring you exactly what you deserve. Connor scoffed, clearly disappointed that I was not throwing a tantrum. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a smug shake of his head. You always were too weak for the big leagues. Have a nice life, Val. He walked out of my office, practically floating on his own manufactured arrogance. As the door clicked shut, my polite smile widened into something sharp and lethal. I swiveled my chair toward my secondary monitor. On the screen was the executed bill of sale for the exact plot of land Connor had just leveraged his entire life to purchase. He thought he was buying prime commercial real estate from a motivated anonymous seller. He had absolutely no idea that the proxy broker who sold Marcus and Connor that land was on my payroll. I was the anonymous seller. I had acquired that specific plot of dirt through a dummy corporation months ago for a fraction of what they'd just paid. I had personally orchestrated the sale, ensuring that Connor and Marcus transferred their millions directly into an account that eventually routed right back to my holding company. They were celebrating a massive acquisition, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just purchased their own financial ruin. My public relations firm operated a dedicated crisis management war room. It was a secure, soundproof conference room equipped with wall-to-wall digital monitors, usually reserved for tracking real-time media fallout for elite clients. Today, it was dedicated entirely to the destruction of my soon-to-be ex-husband and his greedy brother-in-law. I stood in the center of the room sipping a glass of iced, sparkling water, watching the financial tracking software on the main screen. David, my wealth attorney, was on a secure conference call with me, confirming the banking routing numbers. The $5 million plot of land Marcus and Connor had just purchased was indeed located in a highly desirable area of downtown Atlanta. However, it held a fatal legally binding defect that I had discovered during my initial acquisition. Decades ago, the city had quietly zoned that specific parcel as a strict environmental conservation wetland due to an underground tributary system. The zoning laws were absolute and irrevocable. The land could not be developed. It could not be paved. It could not be built upon. No high-rises, no commercial centers, no parking lots. It was legally protected marshland. It was in all practical terms essentially worthless dirt. Marcus and Connor were arrogant enough to believe they could bypass standard due diligence. Because they thought they were getting a backdoor deal through my proxy broker, they skipped the deeper environmental assessments. But I could not leave anything to chance. To ensure the sale went through without setting off any municipal alarms, I had used my extensive public relations connections within city planning to temporarily bury the zoning restriction documents deep in the municipal archives. I ensured that any superficial background check would show the land as standard commercial zoning. It was a masterpiece of informational suppression, timed down to the very minute. "We are tracking the wire transfer now," David said, his voice echoing from the war room speakers. "Connor's bank has authorized the $5 million release. It is hitting the Apex Holdings escrow account." I watched the digital progress bar on the screen. This was the point of no return. Once those funds cleared, Connor's personal guarantee would be locked and his entire net worth would be irreversibly tied to a swamp. The progress bar hit 90%, then 95%, then a green confirmation banner flashed across the screen. "Transfer complete," David confirmed. "Apex Holdings has officially taken possession of the deed. The money is locked in the seller accounts." "Release the documents," I commanded immediately. With a few keystrokes, my team triggered a massive automated data dump. The suppressed environmental zoning files were instantly restored to the public municipal database. Furthermore, anonymous emails containing the strict wetland conservation restrictions were simultaneously dispatched to the City Planning Commission, the Environmental Protection Board, and the underwriting department of Connor's Bank. The information was out. The land was officially branded as undevelopable, and any attempt to break ground would result in immediate federal injunctions. There was no turning back for them now. Marcus had sunk his entire liquid capital into the purchase. Connor had leveraged his home, his retirement, and his professional reputation on a $5 million loan. They had officially sunk their entire combined net worth plus millions in suffocating debt into a patch of protected mud. I walked over to the small executive bar in the corner of the war room. I selected a bottle of aged, robust red wine and poured myself a generous glass. I held the crystal up to the light, admiring the deep, rich color. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the complex flavors. The war room monitors displayed the final closing documents for Apex Holdings. Marcus and Connor were currently popping champagne somewhere in the city, celebrating their brilliant business acumen. I smiled, taking another sip of the wine. They were celebrating their own funeral. Marcus was flying high on his perceived victory, which naturally made him reckless and unnecessarily cruel. Believing he was now a multi-million-dollar real estate tycoon with an untouchable fortune, he decided to accelerate the timeline of our divorce. He no longer wanted to wait for the legal process to naturally evict me from our shared life. He wanted to inflict maximum pain and public humiliation. It happened on a Thursday evening. A massive torrential storm had rolled into Atlanta, turning the sky a bruised purple and unleashing sheets of freezing, relentless rain. I had stayed late at the office finalizing the documentation for my ultimate legal strike. When I finally drove my car up the winding driveway of our shared Buckhead mansion, my headlights caught a devastating scene. Scattered across the wet paved driveway were dozens of black garbage bags. My designer clothes, my shoes, my personal files, and my irreplaceable keepsakes had been haphazardly thrown outside. The bags were soaking wet, some of them torn open by the wind, exposing my belongings to the harsh elements. Marcus had legally changed the locks on our home while I was at work, deciding to execute a brutal illegal eviction just to prove he held all the power. But the cruelty did not end there. Standing on the expansive covered front porch, perfectly shielded from the pouring rain, was Jasmine. She was holding her smartphone up the screen, glowing brightly in the dark evening. She was broadcasting live on Instagram to her thousands of followers, actively recording my arrival. As I stepped out of my car into the freezing rain, she laughed loudly for her digital audience. "Look who finally showed up!" Jasmine taunted to her camera, ensuring her voice carried over the sound of the storm. Atlanta's favorite gold digger finally got taken out with the trash. This is what happens when you try to hold a real man back. You get left in the rain where you belong. Say goodbye to the mansion, Zuri. She expected me to break. She expected me to run up to the porch screaming and crying, begging to be let inside. She wanted a viral video of my absolute degradation to solidify her brother's narrative of his triumphant escape from a terrible wife. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I pulled the collar of my trench coat tight against the chilling rain and walked methodically toward the scattered bags. I moved with absolute terrifying calm. I opened the trunk of my car and began silently loading my wet belongings. I did not rush. I maintained a posture of perfect dignity, completely ignoring the freezing water soaking through my hair and clothes. My silence visibly unsettled Jasmine. Her mocking commentary faltered as she realized she was not getting the hysterical reaction she so desperately wanted to broadcast. Once the last bag was secured in my trunk, I closed it with a soft click. I turned around and walked slowly up the brick pathway toward the covered porch. Jasmine took a step back, her phone dropping slightly as my cold, unblinking gaze locked onto her. I did not look like a defeated woman. I looked like a predator. I reached into the deep inside pocket of my trench coat, which had remained perfectly dry. I pulled out a thick, heavy document bound in a black legal folder. It was the 100-page asset management agreement that governed the entirety of Apex Holdings. It was the exact document Marcus had blindly signed when he transferred his entire net worth into the corporate shell he thought he controlled. I stepped onto the porch, standing just inches away from Jasmine. She looked at me, her bravado completely evaporating under the weight of my silence. I extended my hand, offering her the heavy folder. She took it automatically, her hands shaking slightly. I looked her dead in the eyes, my voice slicing through the sound of the torrential rain, with absolute authority. "Give this to Marcus," I instructed calmly. "And make sure he reads page 74. I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel, walked back into the storm, got into my car, and drove away from the mansion. I knew exactly what was on page 74. It was the transfer of title clause explicitly stating that Apex Holdings and all its assets were 100% owned by Z Corp. I left Jasmine standing on the porch holding the key to her brother's total annihilation. The relentless downpour washed the windshield as I navigated my car away from the Buckhead mansion for the final time. I did not drive to a cheap motel or crash on a friend's couch. I drove straight to a luxury penthouse suite in Midtown Atlanta, a residence I had leased through a corporate proxy 3 months ago. I peeled off my wet trench coat, poured myself a glass of aged bourbon, and placed my cell phone on the marble kitchen island. The screen immediately lit up with a rapid succession of notifications. It was Chloe. She had somehow acquired my personal number and was eager to dance on what she perceived as my grave. My phone chimed relentlessly as the high-resolution images flooded my inbox. The first photo showed a pristine, custom white Porsche 911 parked in a private driveway, a massive red velvet bow strapped to the hood. The second image was a close-up of a glossy real estate deed detailing a luxury townhouse in one of Atlanta's most exclusive gated communities. The purchase price was clearly visible at $1.2 million. The final image was a selfie of Chloe leaning against the Porsche, flashing a diamond ring and a smug, victorious grin. The accompanying text message arrived a second later. "This is what happens when a man finally finds a real woman. He buys her a kingdom in cash. Enjoy the rain, Grandma." A lesser woman would have blocked the number. A lesser woman would have thrown the phone across the room in a fit of rage. I simply smiled, tapped the screen, and exported the entire thread, including the high-resolution metadata embedded in the photos. I forwarded the package directly to Robert, the lead forensic accountant retained by my public relations firm. My instructions were brief and absolute. Track the funding source for the vehicle and the property deed. Less than 48 hours later, Robert called me on my secure line. His voice carried the distinct tone of a professional who could not quite fathom the sheer stupidity of the crime he had just uncovered. I traced the wire transfers. Robert stated, the clicking of his keyboard echoing in the background. Marcus did pay entirely in cash for both the townhouse and the Porsche. But he did not use a personal checking account. He did not even use a standard business loan. He wired a total of $1.35 million directly from the primary corporate operating account of Apex Holdings. I set my coffee cup down, my mind instantly processing the magnitude of his fatal error. Apex Holdings was the corporate shell Marcus had created to hide his wealth from me. It was also the exact corporate shell that, by his own blind signature, was legally registered as a wholly owned subsidiary of my parent company, Z Corp. "Let me ensure I am hearing you correctly, Robert," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "Marcus took $1.35 million from a corporate entity that I legally own, and he used those funds to purchase a personal vehicle and a private residence for his mistress." "That is exactly what he did," Robert confirmed. "Zuri, this is not just a messy divorce tactic anymore. By commingling corporate assets to purchase personal luxury gifts for an unauthorized third party, Marcus has committed massive, undeniable corporate embezzlement. This is a federal crime. The IRS and the federal authorities will view this as blatant corporate theft. He practically gift-wrapped a felony indictment for you." I instructed Robert to freeze the documentation and loop in my litigation team immediately. We drafted the embezzlement lawsuit with ruthless precision. We prepared the legal framework to seize the townhouse and the Porsche as stolen corporate assets, requesting immediate asset freeze orders from a federal judge. But I did not file the lawsuit. Not yet. I placed the finalized, devastating legal documents into my secure digital vault. I wanted Marcus to feel entirely invincible. I wanted him to climb higher so the fall would be absolute. Oblivious to the legal guillotine swinging directly above his neck, Marcus moved swiftly to his next grift. He was burning through capital at an unsustainable rate to maintain his lavish lifestyle with Chloe, and he needed a massive influx of cash. With his bank loans tied up in the useless downtown plot he and Connor had purchased, Marcus decided to exploit the very community that had always supported him. He launched a massive, heavily marketed crowdfunding campaign aimed directly at the African American community in Atlanta. The marketing materials were slick, high-production spectacles. Marcus plastered his face across social media, donning a hard hat and standing in front of the vacant, swampy lot. He delivered passionate, charismatic speeches about reclaiming historic downtown Atlanta, building generational wealth, and constructing a commercial epicenter owned exclusively by Black investors. He promised a guaranteed 30% return on investment within the first year, framing the project as an exclusive opportunity for working-class families to finally get a piece of the elite real estate pie. It was a despicable, predatory scam. He was selling them dreams built on legally protected, undevelopable mud. Inside my crisis management war room, my team quietly intercepted every single piece of data Marcus published. We downloaded the investor prospectuses, the marketing videos, and the financial breakdowns. When my legal team reviewed the official documents Marcus was distributing to potential investors, the sheer brazenness of his fraud, left us entirely speechless. To convince the public that the project was viable, Marcus had uploaded digital copies of environmental permits and municipal zoning clearances. They were spectacular forgeries. My team cross-referenced the serial numbers on his published permits with the Environmental Protection Agency database. The permits did not exist. He had literally photoshopped municipal seals and forged the signatures of city planning officials to mask the fact that the land was a protected wetland. Furthermore, by soliciting funds from unaccredited everyday investors across state lines using digital platforms, Marcus was actively committing federal wire fraud. His falsified financial projections, guaranteeing impossible returns, constituted catastrophic Securities and Exchange Commission violations. He was no longer just cheating on his wife or making poor business deals. He was systematically defrauding hundreds of innocent families out of their hard-earned savings. My cold, calculated anticipation hardened into pure righteous fury. I assigned a dedicated task force within my firm to meticulously archive every single fraudulent post, every forged permit, and every documented wire transfer linked to his crowdfunding portal. We built a bulletproof, incontrovertible dossier detailing dozens of federal felonies. We cataloged his crimes with the clinical precision of a federal prosecutor preparing for a grand jury indictment. My attorneys urged me to hand the dossier over to the authorities immediately to stop the campaign. I refused. If I stopped him too early, he could claim it was an administrative error or blame a rogue subordinate. For the federal wire fraud and SEC violations to stick with inescapable permanence, the crime had to be fully executed. The funds had to cross state lines. The fraudulent contracts had to be formally accepted. I needed him to cross the threshold where a slap on the wrist was legally impossible, ensuring a mandatory federal prison sentence. I sat in my office watching the crowdfunding numbers tick upward on my monitor as innocent people poured their money into his trap. I was the puppet master holding the ropes, waiting for the perfect, devastating moment to pull the trigger so Marcus could never ever escape. The trap was fully primed, packed with enough federal violations to bury Marcus for a lifetime. But a quiet arrest was never part of my strategy. Marcus had built his fraudulent empire on the currency of public perception. He craved the spotlight, thriving on the adoration of the very community he was actively scamming. Therefore, his destruction had to be broadcast in high definition. It was time to introduce the catalyst. I bypassed the standard corporate media outlets and targeted a specific local powerhouse. Roland Vance was an investigative journalist for Atlanta's most aggressive independent news network. He had built his entire career on dismantling corrupt politicians and exposing corporate predators. He was ruthless, immune to charm, and practically rabid when he caught the scent of white-collar crime. Using a heavily encrypted, untraceable server routing through 3 different international proxy networks, my team dispatched an anonymous digital dossier directly to Roland's personal inbox. We did not send him the entire picture. We fed him just enough raw meat to make him hungry. The drop included the genuine municipal zoning maps, clearly designating Marcus's property as a protected environmental wetland, placed side by side with the forged counterfeit permits Marcus was currently displaying on his crowdfunding portal. Roland took the bait within the hour. My media monitoring software tracked his digital footprint as his production team frantically verified the municipal zoning codes. I knew exactly how a journalist of his caliber operated. He would not wait for a polite sit-down interview. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted to catch the fraudster live, unscripted, and entirely off guard. My team provided Roland with one final piece of anonymous intelligence. We sent him the exact dinner reservation Marcus and Chloe had booked for that evening at an ultra-exclusive diamond-rated steakhouse in Buckhead. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, sat back in the leather chair of my command center, and tuned the main digital monitor to the local news network's live feed. At exactly 9 o'clock, Marcus and Chloe emerged from the heavy mahogany doors of the steakhouse. Marcus was wearing a tailored velvet dinner jacket, holding a cigar, laughing loudly as he guided Chloe toward the valet stand. Chloe was dripping in the jewelry purchased with my stolen corporate funds, her head thrown back in manufactured joy. They looked like royalty stepping out to survey their kingdom. They never even saw Roland coming. The investigative journalist stepped out from behind a line of parked luxury vehicles, flanked by a cameraman shouldering a massive broadcast lens and an audio technician wielding a boom microphone. A blinding high-intensity LED camera light snapped on bathing Marcus and Chloe in a harsh, inescapable glare. "Marcus Brooks!" Roland barked, his voice cutting through the humid Atlanta night with lethal authority. "We are live with the Channel 8 investigative team. Can you explain to the citizens of Atlanta why you are actively soliciting millions of dollars from working-class families to build a commercial high-rise on federally protected, undevelopable swamplands?" Marcus froze. The cigar slipped from his fingers, hitting the wet pavement with a soft thud. His charismatic smile completely evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He threw his hand up, trying to block the blinding camera light. "I have no idea what you are talking about." Marcus stammered, his polished media training instantly failing him. "This is a private dinner. Get that camera out of my face." Roland stepped closer, thrusting a laminated printout of the forged environmental permits right into Marcus's chest. The camera zoomed in tight on the documents. "We verified these permits with the Environmental Protection Agency an hour ago, Mr. Brooks. They are entirely counterfeit. You photoshopped municipal government seals to scam your own community. Are you prepared to face federal wire fraud charges for your crowdfunding campaign?" Chloe shrieked, burying her face in her designer clutch, desperately trying to hide from the live broadcast. She stumbled backward in her high heels, nearly tripping over the curb. Marcus was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the parking lot for an escape route. He grabbed Chloe by the arm, roughly yanking her toward the valet stand, completely abandoning his carefully crafted persona of the poised, confident black business mogul. He shoved past the valet attendant, physically pushed Chloe into the passenger seat of his vehicle, and slammed the door. "We have no comment," Marcus shouted frantically over the roof of the car. "My lawyers will be contacting you." He scrambled into the driver's seat, the tires screeching against the asphalt as he sped recklessly out of the parking lot, fleeing like a common criminal on live television. Back in my penthouse, I watched the footage replay on a loop. The broadcast was a masterclass in public humiliation. Within 20 minutes, the video clip was aggressively circulating across every major social media platform. The hashtag demanding justice for the defrauded investors was already trending at the top of the national charts. The outrage was instantaneous and explosive. Community leaders who had previously endorsed him immediately issued statements distancing themselves from his firm. The digital crowdfunding platform, terrified of federal implication, suspended his account and froze all incoming transactions. Thousands of furious, panicked investors flooded the comment sections, demanding their life savings back. Marcus had spent years cultivating an image of absolute perfection. I had destroyed it in exactly 3 minutes. My personal cell phone began to vibrate on the marble kitchen island. The caller ID flashed Marcus's name. I let it ring, watching the screen light up the darkened room. It stopped, then immediately began ringing again. He was desperate. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, and his first instinct was to call the very woman he had so arrogantly discarded. I let it go to voicemail. A notification popped up a moment later. I tapped the screen, playing the audio file on speakerphone. "Zuri, pick up the phone," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with absolute terror. The background noise indicated he was driving erratically. "Zuri, please. You have to help me. Some insane reporter just ambushed me. They are saying the land is a swamp. They are saying the permits are fake. The whole city is turning on me. The investors are pulling out. You have to use your PR firm to spin this. Put out a statement saying I was misled by a contractor. Issue a press release. Do whatever you have to do to clean up this mess. I will give you whatever you want. Please, Zuri, answer the phone." The voicemail clicked off. I picked up my glass of water, taking a slow, refreshing sip. I smiled, a cold, empty expression that reflected the absolute zero of my sympathy. He had thrown me out into a freezing rainstorm, laughed at my pain, and proudly replaced me with an opportunistic assistant. Now he was begging me to be his savior. He was about to learn that my public relations firm did not exist to clean up the messes of federal criminals. It existed to ensure those criminals were buried so deep they would never see the light of day again. While Marcus was spiraling into a media-induced panic attack, an entirely different kind of catastrophe was detonating across town. Connor, the arrogant wealth manager who had mocked my career, was sitting in his sleek, glass-walled office high above the financial district. He was admiring the city skyline, entirely convinced he was the smartest man in Atlanta. He had staked his entire professional reputation, his personal real estate, and $5 million of heavily leveraged bank loans on the Apex Holdings partnership. His desk phone rang. It was a direct prioritized line from the president of his underwriting bank. Connor answered with his usual booming, overconfident tone, expecting a congratulatory call regarding the recent transfer. The voice on the other end was brutally swift and devoid of any professional courtesy. Connor, the bank president, stated, "We just received an anonymous certified dossier from the Municipal Zoning Board. Our compliance team ran an emergency verification. The commercial land you used as the primary collateral for your $5 million capital loan is legally designated as an environmental conservation wetland." Connor sat up straight, his smug demeanor instantly vanishing. "There must be a mistake," Connor argued, his heart rate spiking. "We provided the environmental clearance permits in the loan application. The land is zoned for a multi-use high-rise. The permits you submitted are completely fraudulent." The bank president snapped, his tone turning venomous. "You used heavily doctored municipal documents to secure federal banking funds. The collateral is entirely invalid, which means you are in catastrophic breach of your loan covenant. We are calling the loan in. The full $5 million principal is due by the close of business today, or we are seizing every personal asset you listed in your guarantee." Connor dropped the phone. It clattered against his mahogany desk. The blood rushed from his head, leaving him dizzy and nauseous. He had guaranteed the debt with his own private wealth. If the bank called in the loan and the Apex Holdings money was tied up in a useless swamp, he was not just broke. He was millions of dollars in the negative. His career was over. His house would be foreclosed upon. He had bankrupted his entire family on a single arrogant gamble. A primal, unhinged rage took over his body. He bolted out of his office, ignoring the startled shouts of his secretaries, and sprinted to the parking garage. He drove his car through the Atlanta traffic like a madman, breaking every speed limit until he reached the corporate headquarters of Marcus's real estate firm. Connor bypassed the security desk, storming through the glass corridors like a hurricane. He kicked the double doors of Marcus's executive suite wide open. Marcus was pacing frantically behind his desk, screaming into his cell phone at a defense attorney, his tie loosened and his shirt soaked in nervous sweat. "You lied to me!" Connor roared, his face purple with absolute fury. He lunged across the expansive office, grabbing Marcus violently by the collar of his expensive dress shirt. "You sold me a swamp, you arrogant fraud. The bank just called the loan. They know the permits are fake. Give me my $5 million back right now." Marcus shoved Connor backward, his own panic escalating into violent aggression. "Get your hands off me," Marcus shouted, swatting Connor away. "I do not have your money. It is locked in the Apex escrow account. I cannot access it. The whole city is coming after me. I am going to federal prison." Connor realized the horrifying truth in that exact moment. The money was gone. The land was worthless. The genius investment was a catastrophic, inescapable black hole. Connor let out a guttural yell, swiping his arm across Marcus's desk, sending computer monitors, crystal awards, and legal documents crashing violently to the floor. The two men, previously bound by their shared arrogance and mutual disrespect for me, were now tearing each other apart in the wreckage of their own greed. Back in my penthouse, my personal phone began to ring. The caller ID displayed Jasmine's name. Connor had undoubtedly called his wife in a state of absolute hysterical panic to deliver the news of their impending financial ruin. I answered the call, holding the phone away from my ear as Jasmine's shrieking voice blasted through the speaker. "Zuri, you evil, vindictive witch!" Jasmine screamed, her voice completely unhinged. "Connor just told me everything. We are losing our house. We are losing our savings. You knew about this deal. You handle all of Marcus's public relations. You let him make a bad deal. You abandoned your husband, and now you have destroyed my family. You are going to fix this right now. You are going to give Connor his money back." I listened to her delusional screaming demands with absolute tranquility. She was still trying to blame me for the catastrophic failures of the men she so fiercely protected. She still believed I was the subservient woman she could bully into submission. "Jasmine," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a scalpel, "you told me to step aside and let the real men build an empire. I simply followed your advice. I suggest you start packing your designer bags. The bank moves very quickly when they want their money." I ended the call, cutting off her frantic screaming. I did not just block her number. I opened the encrypted files my private wealth attorney had prepared. I extracted the original signed copies of Connor's personal guarantee documents, the ones explicitly listing his private home, his investment portfolios, and his retirement accounts as forfeit in the event of a loan default. I attached the documents to a secure email and routed it directly to the senior legal compliance officer at Connor's bank. I hit send, ensuring that Connor could not use any backdoor legal maneuvers to shield his private assets from the impending bankruptcy. He had actively participated in my emotional destruction, laughing, while his brother-in-law abused me. I was not just going to let him lose a business deal, I was going to ensure he lost the very foundation of his privileged life. The financial execution was complete. Marcus, entirely oblivious to the federal anvil suspended directly over his head, decided the best way to combat the viral media scandal was to throw a party. He believed he could charm his way out of the crisis. He and Chloe hosted an extravagant catered dinner party at her newly purchased luxury townhouse, inviting a curated list of Atlanta's most elite high-net-worth investors. It was a desperate, transparent attempt to project stability and reassure the financial community that the wetlands scandal was merely a temporary, manageable public relations hiccup. The dining room was a masterclass in performative wealth. Crystal glasses sparkled under custom chandeliers, and a private chef served imported caviar and aged Wagyu beef. Marcus stood at the head of the long mahogany table, holding a glass of vintage champagne. He was in the middle of delivering a charismatic, meticulously rehearsed toast about resilience, visionary leadership, and overcoming the relentless attacks of jealous competitors. He never even got to finish the sentence. The heavy front doors of the townhouse did not just open, they were aggressively pushed wide. 4 individuals in sharp, nondescript business suits strode directly into the dining room. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency that instantly silenced the dinner guests. Marcus lowered his champagne glass, his charming smile faltering. "Excuse me, this is a private residence," he snapped, trying to project authority. Marcus Brooks, the lead agent, stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. He did not ask, he confirmed. He pulled a thick, tightly bound stack of legal documents from his briefcase and slapped them directly onto the center of the mahogany dining table, right next to the caviar display. "You have been officially served by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission," the agent announced, his voice carrying over the stunned silence of the room. "These are federal subpoenas requiring your immediate appearance regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, the distribution of falsified municipal permits, and catastrophic violations of investor solicitation regulations. Additionally, you are hereby served with a civil litigation suit for massive corporate embezzlement filed by Z Corp." Chloe let out a sharp gasp, stepping back from the table. The second agent immediately stepped toward her, handing her a separate, slightly thinner stack of documents. "Chloe Evans," the second agent stated, "you are hereby served with an emergency federal asset freeze order. The deed to this property and the title to the vehicle registered in your name have been formally seized pending an active embezzlement investigation. You are legally prohibited from liquidating, transferring, or selling any assets on these premises." Total, absolute chaos erupted in the dining room. The elite investors, recognizing the immediate radioactive toxicity of federal SEC subpoenas, did not hesitate. They dropped their napkins, grabbed their coats, and practically sprinted for the front door. They were fleeing a sinking ship, desperate to distance themselves from a man who had just been publicly branded a federal criminal. Chloe dropped the asset freeze notice onto the floor. She looked at Marcus, her eyes wide with a combination of sheer terror and unhinged fury. She finally realized she was not just losing her newly acquired kingdom. She was legally implicated as an active accomplice in a federal embezzlement scheme. "You told me this house was clean!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as she shoved Marcus hard in the chest. "You told me you paid in cash. You stole that money from your wife's company. I am going to federal prison because of you." Marcus was hyperventilating. He scrambled for his phone, his fingers shaking so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He dialed his lead defense attorney, pacing frantically back and forth across the dining room, ignoring Chloe's hysterical screaming. The call connected. Marcus, the lawyer, said, his voice grim and hurried. "I just got the notifications. Listen to me very carefully. Do not say a single word to anyone. The SEC has already executed the warrants. I tried to route a retainer fee to my firm, but the transaction was denied." "What do you mean denied?" Marcus shouted, his panic escalating into absolute hysteria. "I have millions in the Apex accounts. Wire the retainer right now." Marcus, the lawyer, interrupted, his tone chillingly final. "The accounts are gone. The feds did not freeze them. The accounts were legally completely emptied and transferred to the parent company 3 hours ago. You do not have a single dollar to your name. We are dropping you as a client." The line went dead. Marcus dropped the phone. It shattered against the hardwood floor. The walls of his carefully constructed fraudulent empire had not just closed in. They had completely collapsed, burying him alive. The narrative snaps violently back to the present inside the cold, imposing walls of the downtown Atlanta courtroom. The echo of Judge Davis's laughter finally subsided. He removed his reading glasses, wiped his eyes with a handkerchief, and cleared his throat, attempting to regain a semblance of judicial composure. The devastating reality of the situation hung heavily in the air. Marcus, still clutching the worthless, arrogant divorce settlement he had tried to force upon me, looked up at the judge. The color had completely drained from his face. Chloe sat frozen in the gallery, her mocking smirk replaced by a look of sheer, paralyzing horror. "Mr. Brooks!" Judge Davis began, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of an executioner reading a final sentence. "I have presided over family court for 22 years. I have seen every conceivable attempt to hide assets, every desperate maneuver to manipulate the legal system. But I must admit, I have never seen a man construct his own financial guillotine with such absolute precision." The judge picked up the certified document I had submitted. He held it up so the entire courtroom, including Jasmine and Chloe in the gallery, could see the official state of Georgia seal stamped in the corner. "You approached this bench today, Mr. Brooks, demanding that this court recognize a post-nuptial asset separation agreement." Judge Davis continued, "You aggressively asserted that your wife Zuri willingly signed away all her rights to your personal capital and your upcoming real estate ventures, which you claimed were securely housed within an entity known as Apex Holdings." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. "Yes, Your Honor," he managed to whisper, his voice trembling. "She signed the agreement. It is legally binding." "Oh, it is certainly legally binding." Judge Davis agreed, his tone turning razor sharp. "But you clearly failed to execute even the most basic level of due diligence regarding the corporate structure of the entity you were utilizing." The judge adjusted his posture, leaning forward over the bench. He began to read aloud from the certified document. "Let the record reflect that Apex Holdings is not an independent, isolated, limited liability company. It is legally registered, incorporated, and entirely chartered as a wholly owned subsidiary of Z Corp." The judge paused, letting the silence amplify the impending devastation. He looked directly at Marcus. "Z Corp is the primary holding company established, owned, and operated entirely by your wife Zuri 3 years prior to your marriage." Marcus's eyes widened in absolute shock. He gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table, his knuckles turning white. Judge Davis did not show a shred of mercy. "When you forced your wife to sign that asset separation agreement, Mr. Brooks, you believed you were locking her out of your wealth. But by actively and legally transferring every single dime of your net worth, your liquid capital, and your property deeds into Apex Holdings, you did not hide your money. You legally, voluntarily, and permanently gifted 100% of your entire net worth directly into your wife's corporate bank account. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. The air rushed out of his lungs in a ragged gasp. He had spent months plotting my financial ruin. He had laughed in my face while I signed the paperwork, entirely unaware that he had just handed me the keys to his entire kingdom. He was legally, unequivocally broke. Judge Davis allowed the heavy silence to stretch, ensuring the absolute finality of the situation settled over the courtroom. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the elevated bench, and looked down at Marcus with a stare that could freeze boiling water. "Let me break this down into terms even you can understand, Mr. Brooks," the judge said, his voice ringing with judicial authority. "When you signed that document, you did not create a protective vault for your wealth. You signed a quit-claim deed to your entire life, the sprawling Buckhead mansion where you so cruelly evicted your wife in the middle of a rainstorm. It now belongs entirely to her corporation. The multi-million-dollar investment portfolios you bragged about, her corporate assets, the commercial real estate developments, the liquid cash reserves, the offshore accounts you thought were securely hidden under the Apex umbrella. They are all legally, unequivocally the property of Z Corp. You do not own a single brick, a single stock, or a single dollar. You have successfully negotiated a divorce settlement where you walk away with absolutely nothing." Marcus stood completely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing as his brain misfired, unable to process the catastrophic magnitude of his own stupidity. His custom-tailored suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume on a broken man. He turned his head slowly, looking back at Zuri. She sat at the defense table, her posture perfectly straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply looked at him with the cold, detached observation of an architect inspecting a demolished building. The sheer terror radiating from Marcus was palpable, but it was nothing compared to the sudden, explosive panic erupting in the gallery. Chloe, who had been sitting frozen in her inappropriate red dress, suddenly shot up from her seat. Her eyes were wide with frantic desperation. She pushed past Jasmine, ignoring the sharp glare of the courtroom bailiff, who immediately stepped forward to maintain order. "That is a lie!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as she pointed a shaking finger at Zuri. Her perfectly manicured facade crumbled into hysterical desperation. "You cannot take my things. The townhouse in Midtown is in my name. The Porsche 911 in the driveway is registered entirely to me. I have the deeds right here in my purse. They are mine. He bought them for me in cash. You do not get to touch them." Judge Davis slammed his wooden gavel down with a sharp, deafening crack that echoed off the high ceiling. "Order in my courtroom," he roared, glaring at Chloe with absolute disdain. "You will remain silent, young lady, or I will have the bailiffs remove you in handcuffs." Zuri's lead attorney stood up smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. He addressed the judge with professional precision. "If it pleases the court, Your Honor, we have already submitted the forensic accounting reports as Exhibit C. The plaintiff, Mr. Brooks, did indeed pay cash for the luxury vehicle and the private residence currently occupied by Miss Evans. However, he did not use his personal funds. The financial records explicitly prove that he wired $1.35 million directly from the primary corporate operating account of Apex Holdings to execute those purchases." Judge Davis turned his stern gaze back to Chloe, who was standing in the aisle clutching her designer handbag, as if it were a life preserver. "Do you understand what that means, Miss Evans?" the judge asked, his tone dripping with lethal condescension. Mr. Brooks did not buy those items with his own money. He used corporate funds belonging to a subsidiary of Z Corp. Legally speaking, he stole money from his wife's company to purchase luxury gifts for his mistress. Therefore, under the laws of the state of Georgia, your luxury townhouse and your sports car are classified as stolen corporate assets. They are subject to immediate seizure. You do not own a house. You do not own a car. You are legally left with nothing but the clothes on your back, and frankly, considering how those were likely paid for, you are lucky we are not demanding those as well." Chloe's face drained of all color, her knees buckled and she collapsed back onto the wooden bench, her hands trembling violently as she dropped her purse. The realization that she had traded her youth and dignity for a kingdom that never actually existed crushed the breath right out of her lungs. She looked at Marcus, not with love or support, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. He had promised her an empire, and instead, he had dragged her into a catastrophic federal nightmare. Marcus could not even look at her. The gravity of his complete and total ruin finally shattered whatever remained of his massive ego. His legs gave out. The man who had built his entire brand on projecting dominance, the man who had stood at church pulpits preaching about his superiority, physically collapsed in the center of the courtroom. He fell heavily to his knees right on the polished hardwood floor. He gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table, his knuckles turning white, as tears of sheer panic streamed down his face. "Your Honor, please." Marcus begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate sob. The polished facade of black excellence was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified fraud. "You cannot do this. It is a mistake. She tricked me. She manipulated the paperwork. You cannot let her take everything I worked my entire life to build. I will be ruined. I will have nothing. Please, I am begging you, throw the agreement out." Zuri watched him beg. She watched the man who had left her worldly possessions out in a freezing rainstorm now weeping on his knees in a court of law. She felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. Judge Davis stared down at the weeping man, with absolutely zero sympathy. He picked up his wooden gavel, gripping the handle tightly. "The court does not entertain buyer's remorse for legally binding contracts you voluntarily executed to defraud your spouse. Mr. Brooks," the judge stated, his voice ringing with finality, "you brought this document to this court. You demanded it be enforced. You attempted to use the legal system as a weapon to leave your wife destitute." Marcus opened his mouth to plead again, but the judge raised his hand, silencing him instantly. The judge looked Marcus dead in the eyes, delivering the final fatal blow. "The only mistake, sir, was your failure to read." Judge Davis banged his gavel down with a loud, definitive crack that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, sealing Marcus's fate forever. The echo of the gavel had barely faded from the high vaulted ceiling when David, my private wealth attorney, smoothly rose from his chair beside me. He adjusted his suit jacket, projecting the absolute calm of a man who held every winning card in the deck. He did not look at Marcus, who was still kneeling on the hardwood floor in a state of catatonic shock. David addressed Judge Davis directly, his voice carrying the crisp, clinical precision of an executioner reading a final ledger. "Your Honor," David began, stepping out from behind the defense table, "while the civil matter of the asset separation agreement has been rightfully settled by this court, we have a secondary, much more severe petition to enter into the official record. On behalf of my client and her parent corporation Z Corp, we are formally requesting that this court refer Mr. Brooks to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal prosecution." Marcus jerked his head up, his bloodshot eyes widening in fresh, unadulterated terror. He tried to push himself up off his knees, but his legs trembled so violently, he slumped back down against the heavy wooden table. David continued without missing a single beat. "As we have established through certified financial records, Mr. Brooks utilized the primary operating accounts of Apex Holdings to wire exactly $1,350,000 to various luxury vendors. Because Apex Holdings is legally owned by my client, Mr. Brooks had zero legal authority to disperse those funds. He did not simply make a poor investment. He intentionally and maliciously siphoned corporate capital to purchase a luxury townhouse and a high-performance sports car for an unauthorized third party. Under the statutes of this state and federal financial regulations, this constitutes massive felony corporate embezzlement." The words hung in the sterile courtroom air, heavy and inescapable. Felony corporate embezzlement. This was no longer a messy divorce, where a husband tried to hide some cash in a secret offshore account. Marcus had stolen over $1 million from a registered corporation to finance his infidelity. He was facing a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. Furthermore, David stated, turning his sharp gaze toward the gallery where Chloe sat, completely paralyzed. Because the recipient of these stolen corporate assets, Miss Evans knowingly accepted these gifts while actively participating in the deliberate exclusion of my client from the financial records, she is legally classified as an active accessory after the fact. Receiving stolen corporate property of this magnitude carries a corresponding federal prison sentence. We intend to name her as a co-conspirator in the criminal indictment. The sheer paralyzing reality of those words shattered whatever remained of Chloe's arrogant delusion. The absolute certainty that she was going to wear a federal prison jumpsuit because she wanted to play house with a married man crashed down upon her. The luxury townhouse was gone. The sports car was gone. Her freedom was rapidly evaporating right before her eyes. Self-preservation is a primal instinct, and Chloe was nothing if not an opportunist. The moment she realized she was legally chained to a sinking ship, she brutally severed the chain. Chloe shot up from the gallery bench, her bright red dress suddenly looking cheap and entirely out of place in a room where serious people were discussing serious prison time. She gripped the wooden railing separating the gallery from the courtroom floor, her knuckles turning bone white. "He lied to me," Chloe screamed, her voice shrill and echoing wildly off the courtroom walls. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Marcus, completely abandoning any pretense of loyalty or affection. "He told me the money was his. He told me he made millions on a commercial deal and wanted to spoil me. I did not know it was stolen money. I had no idea the company belonged to her." Marcus whipped his head around, staring at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for. The betrayal registered on his face, twisting his features into an ugly mask of rage and disbelief. "You ungrateful witch!" Marcus roared back at her, his voice hoarse and cracking. "You begged for that house. You threw a tantrum until I bought you that car. You knew exactly what we were doing to Zuri. Do not try to play the innocent victim now." Chloe did not back down. The panic in her chest had overridden any sense of decorum. She leaned completely over the wooden railing, screaming directly at the judge and my attorney. "I have text messages!" She shrieked, tears of pure terror streaming down her face, ruining her meticulous makeup. "I have emails. I have voice memos of him bragging about how he was going to bleed his wife dry. I will give you everything. I will testify against him. I will tell the district attorney exactly how he planned to hide the money. Just grant me immunity. Please do not send me to jail. I will give you Marcus. I will give you all of it. You backstabbing snake!" Marcus lunged forward, trying to get around the plaintiff table to reach the gallery. Two heavily armed courtroom bailiffs immediately stepped in, grabbing Marcus by the shoulders and shoving him firmly back into his chair. "Sit down and remain seated," the lead bailiff commanded, his hand hovering dangerously close to his utility belt. I sat perfectly still at the defense table. I did not flinch when Marcus yelled. I did not smile when Chloe offered to sell him to a federal prosecutor for a get-out-of-jail-free card. I simply folded my hands in my lap and watched. It was a mesmerizing, vicious spectacle. These were the two people who had stood in my corporate office and laughed at my simulated tears. They were the ones who had sent me taunting text messages showing off stolen luxury vehicles while plotting my total financial ruin. They had felt so powerful, so incredibly untouchable in their arrogance. Now cornered by the relentless, crushing machinery of the legal system, they were tearing each other apart like wild, starving animals. Marcus was screaming obscenities at Chloe, blaming her expensive tastes for driving him to embezzle the funds. Chloe was sobbing hysterically, offering to hand over every password, every dirty secret, and every ounce of Marcus's dignity just to save her own skin. The profound, unbreakable love Marcus claimed to have found with a real woman had evaporated the exact second the money disappeared. It was transactional, cheap, and entirely hollow. I watched them destroy each other with a cold, absolute detachment. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to hurl insults across the courtroom or defend my honor. I had engineered a flawless, inescapable maze, led them directly into the center of it, and simply locked the door behind them. The legal system was an impersonal, devastating weapon, and I was wielding it with surgical precision. Judge Davis hammered his gavel repeatedly, demanding order as the shouting match threatened to derail the entire proceeding. Bailiffs remove Mr. Brooks from the courtroom and detain him in the holding cell, pending the arrival of the federal authorities. The judge commanded, his face red with fury at the blatant disrespect being shown in his court. Miss Evans, you will remain seated where you are until the officers can formally take your statement regarding your offer to turn state's evidence. The bailiffs hoisted Marcus to his feet. He looked physically ill, his eyes hollow and darting wildly around the room. As they dragged him toward the side exit, his gaze met mine one final time. He was looking for a shred of mercy, a hint of the supportive, dedicated wife who had spent 5 years managing his crises and saving him from his own incompetence. He found absolutely nothing. I gave him a slow, deliberate blink, my expression reflecting the absolute zero of my sympathy. I watched the heavy wooden door swing shut behind him, sealing him away into the custody of the state. I turned my attention back to my attorney, ready to finalize the paperwork that would permanently transfer his entire empire into my name. The architect of their destruction was finally going to collect her payment. The heavy oak doors at the side of the courtroom swung shut, cutting off Marcus's frantic pleas. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and deeply satisfying. I remained seated at the defense table, my hands perfectly still, adjusting the cuffs of my blazer. The primary target had been neutralized, stripped of his wealth and his freedom in a single devastating stroke. But the battlefield was not entirely clear. There were still casualties remaining in the gallery. I turned my head slightly, letting my gaze drift past the wooden partition to where Jasmine and Connor were sitting. Their previous arrogance, that toxic, suffocating superiority they had weaponized in my home office just days ago, had completely evaporated. Jasmine was gripping the edge of the wooden pew, her knuckles stark white, her designer handbag forgotten on the floor. Her mouth hung slightly open, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. She had just watched her golden child brother lose his entire empire. But Connor was an entirely different story. Connor, the affluent, untouchable wealth manager, who had mocked my crisis management career as cleaning up trash. Connor, who believed his white privilege and financial pedigree made him the smartest man in Atlanta. He was not looking at Marcus. He was staring directly at me, his face transitioning rapidly from pale shock to a deep mottled red of unhinged fury. The mathematical reality of the situation was aggressively computing in his brain. He had heard the judge declare that Apex Holdings was a wholly owned subsidiary of my corporation. He had heard that Marcus was completely destitute. And he knew with horrifying certainty that less than 24 hours ago, he had wired $5 million in highly leveraged, personally guaranteed bank loans directly into the Apex Holdings escrow account. Connor could not contain the panic. It tore through his polished exterior like a wrecking ball. He shot up from the gallery bench, completely disregarding the sanctity of the federal courtroom. "Wait a minute," Connor shouted, his voice echoing loudly, cracking with sheer desperation. He pointed a trembling finger at the judge, then at me. "Wait a damn minute. I wired $5 million of capital to Apex Holdings yesterday morning. I am a primary investor in the downtown commercial development. If she owns Apex, then she has my money. I want my $5 million transferred back to my holding accounts immediately." Judge Davis, already exasperated by the chaotic disruptions, glared down from the bench. He picked up his gavel but did not strike it, instead pointing the heavy wooden handle directly at Connor. "Sir, you are standing in a court of law," the judge warned, his voice dangerously low. "I do not care who you are or what bad business deals you have made. You will sit down and remain silent, or you will join your brother-in-law in a holding cell for contempt of court." Connor ignored the warning. The adrenaline of impending bankruptcy made him reckless. "I am not sitting down," Connor yelled back, stepping out into the center aisle. He was sweating profusely, his custom suit suddenly looking suffocated and tight. "I signed a partnership agreement with Marcus. I funded the downtown high-rise project. That money is sitting in her corporate accounts right now. I demand a full reversal of the wire transfer. She is committing financial theft." David, my brilliantly methodical wealth attorney, did not even flinch at the accusation. He stood up from the defense table, picking up a sleek black leather folder. He buttoned his jacket with frustrating slowness, letting Connor stew in his own manic panic. "Your Honor," David said calmly, projecting his voice to fill the room. "If I may address the gentleman's concerns for the official record, it might prevent any further outbursts." Judge Davis sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Proceed, counselor. Let us hear why this man believes he can interrupt my courtroom." David turned to face Connor, opening the black folder. I watched the precise moment Connor realized he was outmatched. David was an apex predator in a tailored suit, and Connor was just bleeding prey. "You are Connor Sterling, I presume," David stated, reading from a document. "You executed a $5 million capital transfer into the Apex Holdings escrow account yesterday at 9 in the morning. "Yes," Connor snapped, taking a step forward. "That is my money." "Actually, Mr. Sterling, it is not." David corrected, his tone dripping with absolute freezing finality. "You did not invest in Apex Holdings as a corporate entity. You signed a highly specific non-recourse investment agreement with Marcus Brooks, who was operating as a minority managing partner at the time. You invested those funds for the exclusive purchase and development of a singular asset, specifically parcel number 482 in downtown Atlanta." Connor gritted his teeth. "Exactly. We bought the land. Marcus said the commercial zoning was cleared. We are building a high-rise, so liquidate the asset and return my principal investment." David offered a razor-thin, mocking smile. "I am afraid liquidation will not yield the results you are hoping for, Mr. Sterling. You see, while Apex Holdings did indeed execute the purchase of that parcel using your funds, the land itself is completely worthless." Connor froze. "What are you talking about? It is prime commercial real estate." David pulled a certified municipal zoning map from his folder and held it up. He did not need Connor to see the fine print. He just needed him to understand the gravity of the paperwork. "This parcel is legally classified as a strict environmental conservation wetland. It is protected by state and federal ecological mandates. It cannot be paved. It cannot be developed. You cannot even build a shed on it. The commercial permits Mr. Brooks showed you were fraudulent forgeries. You purchased a $5 million swamp." The air rushed out of Connor's lungs. He gripped the edge of the wooden gallery partition, his knuckles turning white as snow. "You are lying," Connor breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "I checked the preliminary disclosures." "You checked the disclosures Marcus provided you," David countered seamlessly. "You failed to execute independent municipal due diligence. Because the asset you purchased is legally undevelopable, its market value is effectively zero. Now regarding your demand for a refund." David stepped closer to the partition, lowering his voice to deliver the killing blow. "Because you signed a non-recourse investment agreement specifically tied to that single plot of land, your investment dissolved the moment the purchase was finalized. Apex Holdings, which is fully shielded by Z Corp, bears absolutely zero liability for the failure of your speculative real estate venture. We hold the deed to the dirt, but my client's corporation is completely insulated from your personal debt. You took a gamble, Mr. Sterling. You lost." Connor stood paralyzed in the center aisle. The financial calculations were rapid-firing through his brain, each one representing a catastrophic, life-altering failure. He had bypassed standard banking procedures because he wanted to ride Marcus's coattails to instant wealth. He had personally guaranteed that $5 million loan. He had put up his sprawling suburban estate, his stock portfolios, and his retirement accounts as collateral. Because the land was worthless, the bank would immediately call in the loan. He had zero liquidity to cover it. He was bankrupt. He was utterly, permanently ruined. The realization snapped something deep within his psyche. The arrogant, condescending wealth manager who had marched into my office and told me to step aside and let the real men handle the money was dead. In his place was a cornered, desperate man looking for someone to blame for his own monumental stupidity. He could not attack me. I was protected by a wall of high-powered attorneys and airtight corporate shields. He could not attack Marcus, who was currently sitting in a holding cell waiting for federal agents. So Connor turned to the only available target. He slowly rotated his body, looking down at his wife Jasmine, who was still sitting in the pew shivering with quiet, terrified sobs. "You did this!" Connor hissed, his voice trembling with a terrifying, unhinged rage. Jasmine flinched, looking up at her husband with wide, frightened eyes. "Connor, please," she whispered, reaching out to grab his sleeve. "We can fix this. We will call your father. We will hire lawyers." Connor violently slapped her hand away. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet courtroom. "Fix this," he roared, completely, losing any remaining shred of self-control. "There is no fixing this, Jasmine. I am personally on the hook for $5 million. The bank is going to take my firm. They are going to take the house. We are destitute." He leaned down, pointing his finger directly in her face, his features twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "This is your fault. You pushed me into this. You kept telling me how brilliant your brother was. You kept bragging about this unstoppable real estate empire. Your brother is a common street hustler, and you are just as stupid as he is." Jasmine shrank back against the wooden bench, tears streaming down her face. "Do not speak to me like that," she cried, trying to muster a fraction of the elitist pride she had weaponized against me for years. "We are a respected family. You married into this family. Respect." Connor laughed, a harsh, manic sound that bordered on insanity. "You have no respect. You have no family legacy. Your entire life is a fraud financed by your brother stealing from his wife. I leveraged my entire life because I listened to you. You ruined me. Your pathetic ghetto family ruined my entire life. I am filing for divorce the second I walk out of this courthouse. I am not letting the bank take whatever I have left just because I am tied to you." "Connor, no!" Jasmine screamed, lunging forward to grab his jacket. "You cannot leave me. We have a life together." "Get off me!" Connor snarled, shoving her back so forcefully she fell hard onto the wooden bench. "I am done with you. I am done with your criminal brother. You deserve to be in the gutter with him." Connor did not look back. He turned and sprinted down the center aisle, pushing through the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom, fleeing the scene of his absolute financial slaughter. He was running toward a future of bank foreclosures, ruined credit, and professional disgrace. Jasmine sat alone in the gallery, weeping hysterically, her carefully crafted facade of black excellence and social superiority completely shattered. The woman who had marched into my home office and viciously mocked my empty womb, who had laughed and recorded me while I was standing in the freezing rain, loading my belongings into a car, was now publicly humiliated, abandoned by her husband, and facing total social and financial ruin. I sat at the defense table watching her cry. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel the need to offer a comforting word. I simply reached into my designer briefcase, pulled out my legal notepad, and checked her name off my mental list. Marcus was gone. Connor was destroyed. Jasmine was broken. I turned to David, who was quietly organizing the asset transfer documents. The courtroom was finally clearing out, the bailiffs whispering amongst themselves about the spectacular implosion they had just witnessed. "David," I said, my voice crisp and commanding, completely devoid of any lingering emotion, "ensure the paperwork for the deed transfers is expedited. We need the titles to the properties updated to reflect Z Corp immediately." David nodded, slipping the files into his briefcase. "Everything is in motion, Zuri. You officially own the board. What is the next move?" I stood up, smoothing the pristine fabric of my emerald green blazer. I looked down at my watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. The day was far from over, and I had one final loose end to tie up. "Call the sheriff's department," I instructed, my eyes locked on the heavy courtroom doors. "Request a civil standby for a corporate asset seizure. We are going to Midtown. It is time to evict a mistress." The afternoon sun beat down on the pristine streets of Midtown Atlanta as my private driver pulled the black SUV up to the curb. We were parked directly in front of a stunning 3-story townhouse constructed of sleek glass and dark steel. It was a beautiful piece of real estate, located in one of the most exclusive, highly coveted neighborhoods in the entire city. It was the exact kind of property that signaled you had truly made it. Sitting right in the center of the immaculate cobblestone driveway was the custom white Porsche 911, the massive red velvet bow having long since been removed. I sat in the back seat of my vehicle for a moment, simply taking in the view. Marcus had spared absolutely no expense when it came to financing his betrayal. He had taken the capital generated by my public relations firm, the money I had earned through years of managing crises for Atlanta's elite, and he had poured it directly into this monument of infidelity. He had essentially forced me to buy my own replacement, a luxury kingdom. I stepped out of the SUV. The humid Georgia air wrapped around me, but I felt nothing but absolute freezing focus. Waiting for me on the sidewalk were two marked cruisers from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department and a massive heavy-duty commercial moving truck. 4 deputies stood by the vehicles reviewing the paperwork my legal team had expedited through the court system. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the lead deputy said, tipping his hat slightly as I approached. "We have reviewed the federal asset freeze order and the civil seizure mandates from Judge Davis. We are cleared to secure the premises and assist your recovery crew in removing the stolen corporate assets." "Thank you, Deputy," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly calibrated. "I want this done strictly by the book. No unnecessary force, but absolute compliance. Every piece of furniture, every piece of jewelry, and that vehicle in the driveway belongs to my corporation. The current occupant is to be removed from the premises immediately." The deputies nodded, moving in a coordinated formation up the manicured walkway. I followed a few paces behind the lead foreman of my hired moving crew, trailing my steps. The deputy did not bother ringing the designer doorbell. He pounded a heavy, authoritative fist directly against the solid oak front door. The sound echoed sharply down the quiet, affluent street. It took less than 30 seconds for the door to slowly swing open. Chloe stood in the threshold. She was a devastating contrast to the arrogant, smirking woman who had proudly strutted into my office just weeks ago. She was still wearing the bright red designer dress she had worn to the courthouse, but it was deeply wrinkled and stained with sweat. She had kicked off her high heels, standing barefoot on the imported hardwood floors. Her expensive makeup was entirely ruined, smeared across her cheeks in dark, jagged streaks from hours of hysterical, terrified crying. "Miss Chloe Evans," the lead deputy stated, holding up the thick stack of court orders. "We are here executing a lawful seizure of corporate assets on behalf of Z Corp. You have been served with a federal asset freeze regarding this property and the vehicle registered at this address. You are required to vacate the premises immediately." Chloe staggered backward, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She shook her head frantically, her breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. "No, you cannot do this," she cried, her voice hoarse and broken. "Marcus said his lawyers were fixing it. He told me to wait here. He said nobody could take my house." "Marcus is currently sitting in a federal holding cell. Miss Evans," I said, stepping out from behind the deputies and crossing the threshold into the grand foyer. "He lied to you right up until the very moment they put him in handcuffs." Chloe froze. Her wide, bloodshot eyes locked onto me. She looked at my pristine emerald green blazer, my perfectly composed expression, and the absolute authority I carried into the home she thought she owned. The sheer reality of her situation finally bypassed her denial and crashed directly into her nervous system. She was not protected. She was not a queen. She was a squatter living in a house purchased with stolen money, and the rightful owner had just walked through the front door to collect. I stepped further into the foyer, my designer heels clicking sharply against the imported Spanish tile. I took a slow, deliberate look around the ground floor. The interior design was aggressively tacky, a desperate attempt to showcase wealth without a single ounce of actual taste. There were massive velvet sectionals, gaudy gold-plated mirrors, and abstract sculptures that looked like they belonged in a cheap hotel lobby. It was offensive to my aesthetic sensibilities, but it was all highly liquid corporate property. I raised my left arm, pulling back the sleeve of my blazer to look at my diamond-encrusted watch. "It is exactly 2:45 in the afternoon," I announced, dropping my arm and locking my gaze onto Chloe's terrified face. "I am going to be exceptionally generous today. I am giving you exactly 30 minutes to pack your belongings." Chloe opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, silencing her instantly. "Do not interrupt me. You are allowed one single suitcase. You may pack your personal clothing, your cheap drugstore makeup, and your basic toiletries. You will leave all designer handbags, all electronics, and every single piece of jewelry Marcus purchased for you on the kitchen island. Do not attempt to hide anything. The deputies will search your bag before you cross this threshold. If you attempt to steal my corporate assets, I will instruct them to arrest you on the spot for grand larceny. Your 30 minutes starts right now. Chloe let out a gut-wrenching sob, turning and sprinting up the grand floating staircase. She knew I was not making an idle threat. The deputies immediately fanned out across the ground floor to secure the perimeter. I nodded to the foreman of my moving crew. Pack everything I instructed calmly. Start with the artwork and the high-end electronics. Have the towing company load the Porsche onto the flatbed right now. I do not want that vehicle touching my driveway a second longer than necessary. The townhouse instantly transformed into a hive of calculated, devastating activity. A dozen professional movers swarmed into the residence carrying heavy-duty packing crates and protective wrapping. I stood perfectly still in the center of the grand foyer, watching the systematic dismantling of the life Marcus had built for his mistress. Movers carried out massive flat-screen televisions. They dismantled the custom dining room table. I watched out the front windows as a heavy-duty tow truck backed up to the driveway, securing thick metal chains to the axles of the pristine white Porsche. The grinding sound of the winch echoed loudly as the luxury sports car was unceremoniously dragged up onto the flatbed, stripped away from its owner in broad daylight. Upstairs, the sound of slamming drawers and frantic hysterical crying drifted down into the foyer. Chloe was tearing through her master suite, desperately trying to salvage whatever remnants of her life she could cram into a single piece of luggage. Every few minutes, a deputy would walk downstairs carrying a handful of diamond bracelets, pearl necklaces, and luxury watches, placing them meticulously into an evidence bag on the kitchen counter. The wealth she had so proudly flaunted was being confiscated right in front of her eyes. Exactly 29 minutes later, Chloe slowly descended the floating staircase. She was dragging a generic scuffed canvas duffel bag behind her. It was a pathetic, jarring contrast to the woman who had smirked at me from the gallery of a federal courtroom just hours ago. She had lost her designer wardrobe. She had lost her jewelry. She was stripped down to the absolute bare minimum of her existence. She reached the bottom of the stairs, dropping the heavy duffel bag onto the tile floor. A deputy stepped forward, unzipping the bag, to conduct a thorough search. He poked through her sweaters and jeans, ensuring no stolen corporate property was hidden within the folds. After a moment, he zipped the bag shut and nodded to me, confirming she was clean. Chloe stood trembling in the center of the foyer. The house around her was already half empty, the walls stripped of their expensive art, the living room devoid of its plush furniture. She looked at me, her face a mask of absolute broken desperation. "Zuri, please," Chloe begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please, you have to give me a second chance. I have nowhere to go. I do not have $1 to my name. My bank accounts were linked to his. I cannot even afford a hotel room tonight." She took a tentative step toward me, clasping her hands together in a gesture of frantic supplication. "He manipulated me, Zuri. You know what Marcus is like. He groomed me. He promised me the world and told me you were terrible to him. He lied to me, just like he lied to you. We are both victims of his narcissistic abuse. Please, I am begging you, just let me keep the car so I can sleep in it. Just let me have something. Do not leave me on the street." I looked down at the weeping, shattered woman standing in my foyer. She was trying to play the ultimate victim card, trying to manufacture a sense of shared sisterhood against a toxic man. It was a manipulative, desperate tactic. She wanted me to feel a surge of feminist solidarity and grant her mercy. I felt absolutely nothing. I took a slow, measured step toward her. I maintained perfect, icy eye contact. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, lethal intensity that caused her to physically flinch. "You are not a victim, Chloe." I stated my words, slicing through her pathetic sobbing. "You were an eager, active participant. You knew he was married. You knew you were spending my money. You strutted into my corporate office, stood in my doorway, and laughed in my face while telling me to sign away my rights." I tilted my head slightly, recalling the exact memory that had fueled my flawless strategy over the past 8 months. And when Marcus changed the locks on my home when he threw my belongings out into a freezing torrential rainstorm, you did not offer me an ounce of sisterhood. You sent me a text message bragging about this very house. You smiled when he threw me out in the rain. I checked the diamond watch on my wrist one final time. I looked back up at her, my expression hardening into absolute unyielding granite. "Your 30 minutes are up," I declared. "Get out of my house." Chloe let out a strangled, breathless cry. She realized in that exact second that there was no mercy to be found. The deputies stepped forward, their presence leaving no room for argument. One of them pointed firmly toward the open front door. Chloe reached down with trembling hands, grabbing the strap of her cheap canvas duffel bag. She dragged it across the beautiful Spanish tile, her bare feet padding softly against the floor. She walked out the heavy front doors, stepping out into the humid Atlanta afternoon, with absolutely nothing to her name. I watched her walk down the pristine driveway, completely ignoring the stares of the affluent neighbors who had gathered on their manicured lawns to watch the spectacle of the police eviction. I watched as the tow truck secured the white Porsche and drove away down the street, taking her kingdom with it. I stepped forward, grabbing the heavy brass handles of the front doors. I pulled them shut with a loud, definitive click, turning the deadbolt to lock out the past forever. I turned around and looked at the empty, echoing foyer of my newly reclaimed luxury corporate asset. The air inside the house felt instantly lighter, purged of the toxic greed that had infected it. The eviction was complete. The mistress had been excised from my life with absolute ruthless efficiency. The morning after the courtroom massacre and the townhouse eviction, the Atlanta media landscape erupted. Roland Vance did not just publish a standard news segment, he unleashed a digital tidal wave. His investigative report explicitly linked Marcus's fraudulent wetlands crowdfunding to the high-risk financial maneuvering of Connor Sterling. The elite wealth management firm where Connor had built his arrogant, untouchable persona moved with lethal corporate swiftness. Before the stock market even opened for trading, Connor's access keycard was deactivated. When he arrived at the sleek glass tower, completely panicked and desperate to access his client lists, 2 armed security guards intercepted him in the lobby. They handed him a cardboard box containing his desk plants and a few personal photographs. He was not permitted to step foot on the executive floor. The senior partners issued a brutal press release minutes later, completely disavowing Connor and confirming they were fully cooperating with federal investigators regarding his falsified loan applications. By noon, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially seized his frozen bank accounts and impounded his corporate servers. Connor was not just unemployed, he was radioactive. Jasmine experienced a completely different yet equally devastating brand of destruction. For years, she had weaponized her social standing against me, wielding her affluent lifestyle like a blunt instrument. Her entire identity was tied to the pristine gated communities of Buckhead and the velvet-roped charity galas of Atlanta. The social execution commenced before she even finished her morning coffee. Her phone chimed with a sterile automated email from the board of directors at her ultra-exclusive country club. They were invoking the morality clause hidden deep within their bylaws, permanently revoking her membership effective immediately. There was no phone call, no polite explanation, just a digital excommunication. An hour later, the president of the elite philanthropic society she chaired sent a courier to her sprawling, heavily mortgaged suburban estate. The courier delivered a formal letter demanding her immediate resignation, citing the catastrophic reputational damage her family name now carried. Her affluent friends, the same women who had laughed at her cruel jokes about my fertility, completely vanished. Calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages were left on read. Jasmine was entirely isolated, trapped in a massive home that was rapidly sliding into foreclosure because her husband's bank had called in his $5 million personal guarantee. Desperation is a powerful solvent. It dissolves pride, dignity, and memory. 3 days after the scandal broke, my receptionist buzzed my secure line. She sounded incredibly uncomfortable, informing me that Jasmine Sterling was standing in the lobby, hysterically refusing to leave without speaking to me. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored blazer. I instructed security to send her up to my corner office. I wanted to witness the wreckage firsthand. Jasmine practically stumbled through my double glass doors. The transformation was shocking. The impeccably styled, arrogant woman who had marched into my home and ordered me to let the real men handle the business was completely gone. Her designer clothes looked rumpled as if she had slept in them. Her makeup was absent, revealing dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. She looked absolutely frantic, her hands trembling as she clutched a leather purse. "Zuri, please," Jasmine begged, her voice cracking as she rushed toward my desk. "You have to help me." Connor left. He packed a bag in the middle of the night and just left. The bank froze all our joint accounts. I cannot even buy groceries. I am losing the house by the end of the month. You own Apex Holdings now. You have all of Marcus's capital. You hold the leverage. I sat back in my high-backed leather chair, steepling my fingers together. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to sit in the suffocating discomfort of her own hypocrisy. I did not offer her a seat. "We are family." Zuri Jasmine sobbed, tears spilling over her cheeks as she gripped the edge of my desk. "You cannot just let me be thrown out on the street. I know Marcus treated you terribly, but I am your sister-in-law. Please, I just need a loan. Just enough to hire a defense attorney and keep the bank away for a few months. I will pay you back. I promise." "Family," I repeated, testing the word on my tongue as if it were a foreign, distasteful concept. "That is a fascinating choice of words, Jasmine. I distinctly recall you standing on my front porch broadcasting a live video to your followers while I loaded my soaked belongings into my car in the freezing rain. I recall you laughing and calling me a gold digger who was finally being taken out with the trash. Your definition of family seems to fluctuate based entirely on your financial convenience." "I was wrong," Jasmine cried, her entire body shaking. "I was so wrong. Marcus manipulated me. He told me you were trying to ruin him. I just wanted to protect my brother. Please, Zuri. I have absolutely nothing left." I opened the top drawer of my desk. I did not reach for a checkbook. I did not reach for a loan agreement. I pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper and slid it smoothly across the glass surface, stopping right in front of her trembling hands. Jasmine looked down, her brow furrowing in desperate confusion as she tried to read the document through her tears. It was a generic, double-sided employment application for a local fast food franchise. Jasmine stared at the paper, the devastating reality of the insult finally registering in her widened eyes. "You once came into this exact office and told me that my crisis management career was just cleaning up other people's trash," I stated, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp register that offered absolutely zero mercy. "You told me to step aside and let the real business owners work." I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto her terrified face. "I took your advice, Jasmine. Now it is your turn to step aside. I suggest you fill out that application carefully. They are currently hiring shift managers." Jasmine let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She looked at me with a mixture of profound hatred and absolute defeat, realizing there was no forgiveness, no loan, and no salvation to be found in this room. "Time to step aside and let the real business owners work?" I echoed her past insult with flawless precision. I reached over and pressed the intercom button on my phone. "Security will show you out." Two uniformed guards immediately entered the office. They did not wait for her to argue. They placed their hands firmly on Jasmine's shoulders and guided her away from my desk. She did not fight them. The fight had been completely drained out of her. She simply hung her head and walked out the door, clutching the fast food application in her shaking hand. The final toxic element had been systematically removed from my life. 6 months passed, bringing the crisp, revitalizing air of a Georgia autumn to sweep away the oppressive heat of the summer. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before me, an endless expanse of glass and steel, catching the golden light of the late afternoon sun. I stood on the expansive private balcony of my newly acquired corporate headquarters. My public relations firm had not just survived the scandal, it had exponentially expanded. By publicly executing the removal of a corrupt real estate mogul, my agency had become the undisputed powerhouse of crisis management in the South. I leaned against the glass railing, breathing in the rare, intoxicating scent of absolute victory. I had spent the last half-year meticulously dismantling the financial remnants of Marcus Brooks. I liquidated every single asset trapped within the Apex Holdings vault. The useless protected wetland was formally donated to a state conservation trust, yielding a massive, perfectly legal corporate tax deduction for Z Corp. The luxury vehicles, the offshore accounts, and the overpriced commercial real estate plots were systematically auctioned off to the highest bidders. I scrubbed the capital entirely clean. But I did not hoard the wealth. I transformed it. I used the liquidated funds to establish the Zuri Vanguard Foundation. It was a fully endowed multi-million-dollar philanthropic trust designed exclusively to provide comprehensive full-ride academic scholarships for young, ambitious Black women entering the fields of crisis management and corporate law. I was ensuring that the next generation of women would enter the corporate battlefield fully armed, legally protected, and entirely immune to the manipulations of mediocre men. Marcus had tried to build a fraudulent empire to feed his ego. I had used his dismantled kingdom to build a fortress of generational empowerment. The heavy glass door to my balcony slid open with a soft, expensive whisper. My executive assistant stepped out into the crisp air, carrying a sleek ceramic cup of dark, freshly brewed espresso on a silver tray. She offered a respectful nod, placing the tray on the patio table before handing me my primary secure cell phone. It was vibrating with a steady, relentless rhythm. I picked up the espresso, letting the rich, bitter aroma center me, and glanced down at the glowing screen. The caller identification did not display a name. It displayed an automated routing number originating from the United States Federal Bureau of Prisons. Marcus had officially exhausted his appeals. The federal judge, entirely unamused by his blatant forgery and predatory crowdfunding scams targeting working-class families, had handed down a severe and mandatory sentence. Marcus was currently serving 8 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and massive violations of the Securities and Exchange Commission regulations. There was no parole for federal convictions. His custom-tailored suits had been permanently traded for a standard-issue khaki uniform. I tapped the green icon on the screen and brought the phone to my ear. An automated robotic voice immediately announced that I was receiving a collect call from an inmate at a federal correctional institution. I was prompted to accept the charges. I pressed the corresponding number on my keypad. I wanted to hear the sound of his absolute defeat. Zuri, the voice on the other end, cracked instantly. It was a hollow, desperate, and terrifyingly small sound. Marcus was weeping. The booming, charismatic baritone that had commanded megachurch pulpits and captivated elite gala audiences was completely gone. Zuri, please, thank God you answered. Please do not hang up the phone. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. The dark roast was flawless. I did not say a word. I let the absolute silence stretch across the line, forcing him to sit in the suffocating reality of his own destruction. "It is a nightmare in here," Marcus sobbed, his breath hitching in a pathetic, rhythmic panic. "You have no idea what it is like. They took everything. I have nothing. Chloe testified against me and took a plea deal. Connor is telling everyone I manipulated him. I am completely alone. Zuri, you were the only one who ever truly loved me. You were the only woman who actually had my back and tried to protect me. I was so arrogant. I was so stupid. Please, baby. Please forgive me." He paused, taking a ragged, desperate breath. He was building up to the true purpose of his call. He was finally reduced to the very position he had tried to force upon me. "I just need a little help," Marcus begged, his voice dropping to a humiliating whine. "The food in here is terrible. The conditions are awful. I just need you to put a little money in my commissary account. Just a few $100s so I can buy some decent meals and make some phone calls. You have all the money now, Zuri. Please just show me a little mercy." I stood at the edge of the balcony, looking down at the bustling, vibrant streets of the city I now effectively controlled. I thought about the torrential rainstorm. I thought about my designer clothes thrown into the mud. I thought about the arrogant smirk on his face when he slid that worthless divorce settlement across the mahogany table in the courtroom. I leaned slightly closer to the receiver, ensuring my voice was crystal clear, perfectly modulated, and devoid of even a microscopic fraction of sympathy. You sat in a courtroom and confidently declared that I would never touch your money again, Marcus. I stated my words, slicing through the digital connection like a freshly sharpened guillotine blade. He stopped crying. He held his breath on the other end of the line, waiting for a reprieve that was never going to come. You were right, I continued, my voice echoing with icy, absolute perfection. Because it was my money all along. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I did not wait to hear his reaction. I did not care if he screamed or begged or completely shattered into a million pieces against the concrete walls of his prison cell. I pressed the red button, severing the connection with a sharp, definitive click. I opened the settings on my phone, navigated to the incoming number, and permanently blocked the Federal Routing Exchange. Marcus Brooks was officially erased from my existence. He was a closed file, a handled crisis, a completed demolition project. I handed the cell phone back to my assistant, who was waiting quietly by the glass doors. Tell the legal department to finalize the acquisition of the new commercial high-rise on Peachtree Street, I instructed smoothly. And draft a press release for the foundation. It is time to announce our next round of full-ride scholarships. I turned back toward the expansive view of the Atlanta skyline. The sun was beginning to set, casting brilliant shades of purple and gold across the glass towers of my city. The storm was over. The garbage had been permanently taken out. The unbothered queen of crisis management took one final satisfying sip of her espresso and went back to ruling her empire. The most powerful lesson from Zuri's story is the undeniable strength of moving in silence and maintaining absolute emotional control. When faced with ultimate betrayal, she didn't waste her energy on screaming matches or public tears. Instead, she used her intellect, patience, and professional expertise to build a flawless strategy. It teaches us that true power doesn't come from proving your worth to people who disrespect you. It comes from knowing your own value and securing your own independence. The ultimate revenge is elevating yourself, reclaiming your peace, and building an empire where toxic people simply no longer exist. What was your favorite moment from Zuri's masterclass in reclaiming her power? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and hit that subscribe button for more empowering stories.